In a way, I'm reconsidering my position on something, my friend. At least in the fact that, like most things in life, there's a balance to be found. It's like work and play. If we worked all the time, we'll get too tired to really keep working. But if we play all the time, we may not make any progress towards something substantial. So it's kind of one of those things where we need both in our lives. Now, in my mind, there are times when a story can just be a story. It's basically a popcorn flick, something that you just basically enjoy for a bit. Now, some people might just call that content to be consumed. But again, it's something to enjoy, take your mind off things, relax, whatever. That is kind of the purpose of this story. But the truth is that no story really exists in the vacuum. It may not just be a story, as even those popcorn flicks are made to keep eyes on it, may, or even to just have it in the background while you're doing stuff. You might not have to really think about it. It might not really say anything in a sense, but it's to keep your eyes on it. Probably with a few explosions. That generally seems to help. But again, those stories are created with an audience in mind. And that's the key point, is that most stories have an audience in mind. Even if sometimes the audience is simply the writer. And that's the thing, sometimes a writer gets an idea and they actually like it. It may not actually make any money, or nobody may actually like it, but they enjoy it. They have joy in creating that story. So again, they're doing the story for themselves. Other times, the writer is working out frustrations or their therapy session basically through a story, and then sometimes that can be given out and people may make money, but sometimes it can fall flat on its face as well, because sometimes it's kind of obvious when it's like there's times certain genres that are typically therapy sessions in a sense, like those memoirs or biographies of a person's journey, but other times it's like, yeah, this isn't what I signed up for. So it's kind of tea of how they're marketing the story and so forth as well. But in sometimes the audience is part of a group, and so people like them will be the natural audience if they're writing a story that the writer themselves would enjoy. And so you tend to get very niche with it, but you can also have a broad audience. Again, think about the explosions. A lot of people will go to see the movie to just be entertained for a bit. And again, you tend to get very detailed in like going into like men ages 25 to 35, women 35 to 45, whatever it is, and those kinds of things where you're looking at kind of those different groups and what those groups will generally like. And then you won't get every single person in them, but with the generalization, you can kind of be like, okay, they'll probably like this. And so we'll put it in there to get that audience in. Of course, all this is pretty much just about marketing, yet it highlights how the biases and perceptions of both writers and audience is can come into play. As in, those biases and perceptions are the one filter we can never get rid of. And that's an important question to ask, is how do we filter the stories we listen to? Again, we can consider the news stories. Depending on if we trust the person delivering the news, we can be like, oh yeah, that's totally true, or that's not true at all, why are you lying to me? And again, we have a bias about the person delivering the news. Or maybe we have a bias about the kind of content they are talking about, the persons they might be talking about. Like, that person would never do that. Oh yeah, that person would totally do that. So again, it's important to consider how those biases come to play. And in a story, we should think about the common light where people are like, where two characters have been written to be friends, but people are like, oh yeah, they're lovers or whatever. And we can even have the thing where not even the production crew of the story agrees with it. Like some people are feeding into the thing of, oh yeah, they are definitely into each other, whereas others like, we just wrote them as friends, or maybe they're stared to, because some people tend to get really weird with that shipping kind of realm, but that's another topic. But anyway, it just goes into our biases, and we often see things as we are rather than as they are. But in those filters are what we apply to stories generally. So we don't really get the benefit of a story in a vacuum. But now maybe you're introducing someone to a genre. So the first story they did will be their introduction. So maybe that is a story in a vacuum. And that would probably happen once in a blue moon, because let's be honest, if you're writing a romance novel, it's probably, or a romance story, it's probably going to be compared to Romeo and Juliet or Jane Austen. If you're writing a sci-fi story, it's probably going to be Star Wars or Star Trek. And if you're writing a fantasy story, let's be honest, it's probably going to be Tolkien. That's the comparison. So it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, there are kind of like mainstays of the genre that it will be compared to. And sometimes you can use it to market that. It's like this or it's like that. So people kind of know what they're expecting. So it can be a benefit as well. And in another sense, we can have a person's work. Maybe they're an actor who has always been typecast, or maybe they have showcased their range throughout a multitude of stories. So people are really like, oh yeah, that's a good actor, or they're always doing this role, aren't they? Or maybe it's the brand of a company where they're always putting out good quality stories, or maybe they've always put out shovelware pretty much. So it's one of those things that you consider. And maybe sometimes it's like you see a decline from when certain people left the company, and it's like, yeah, I definitely see what happened there. And then sometimes it may be slightly easier to go indie or actually be the first introduction. Where if you're indie, you don't really have the expectations of someone else. It's like your first introduction. And again, if you're establishing a new IP or whatever, that first kind of story introduction is where you set the kind of guidelines, and you can hopefully will set them to go up rather than go down. But again, that's one of the things with a story that you're building an IP on, is that you kind of start to begin a canon, and you start to begin a history, unless you're basically doing a clear anthology work from the beginning. It's like, yeah, there will probably be certain things that are expected. Characters are going to supposedly act in certain ways, and so forth. There are certain things that have happened in history that you won't just gloss over all the time or whatever, or basically still like, oh yeah, that actually didn't happen, even though it's been the mainstay of this character's story for so many years. And so it's just one of those things that happen, especially if writing a new entry in something that is already established. Another thing to think about is story elements. And some people will say that there are only so many different kinds of stories to tell, that once you get to a certain point, the plots all kind of blur together and you can kind of understand them clearly. Yet, the thing is that there are some stories that truly have timeless themes, and ones that have themes that have clearly worn out their welcome. And part of that is simple pattern recognition. If a lot of stories are telling the same thing, it might be time to tell a different story. Because even if we can tell the same story a bit better, it will generally get lumped in with the rest and just the generalization of why are all the stories the same? Or, so again, if you have this character going through the same character arc, and it's just the same character with the same face, they all have the same character traits and so forth. They all talk the same even. So it's kind of like, what is going on here? Why can't we have a different story? And again, that's kind of thing is that you need to pay attention to kind of what other stories are out there. And again, that can be kind of thing where certain companies will see things, oh, this was a success. And they start copycatting it, hoping to get that success as well. But yet they fail to realize either that it was a novelty that got that success in the first place because it was so different. And by trying to copy it, they are just kind of becoming the copy. They won't ever be the original. Or it's because they realize that while the first version had a bit of heart to it, had a bit of character to it, they're just trying to make a checklist to follow the path to success, which can work at some point, but generally when it comes to creative works, doesn't really work. But again, it's like, yeah, those are basically my thoughts on the matter. Why not share yours in the comments below? And if you enjoyed this video, you can like and share it as well. Anyway, I'm Jonah, and you've been watching Lions Made Media, where we celebrate stories and the lessons learned. Anyway, thank you for listening to my musings. Talk to you later, and have a great rest of your day.